Howdy, howdy. This is Dr. John back here on another Thursday episode of Ask Dr. John. What a coincidence, huh? So today I'm going to talk about some things that I think are incredibly important. Don't get talked about a lot. Some of you are voracious students and do a lot of research, so you've run into some of these things, I'm certain. But I think it can never be talked about enough. So I'm going to hit a few high points of the post-pandemic or the pandemic or whatever you want to call it, issues, which are grossly underestimated, undertreated, and kind of shined on, I'll say, by a lot of the medical profession. Now, more and more, because there are so many studies coming out that are showing the dangers in a post-pandemic world, the dangers to our ongoing health, we're seeing a little bit more of it talked about, and we're actually seeing clinics. Stanford has a clinic, other places have clinics about treating long COVID, post-COVID, et cetera, and a fair number treating post-vaccine injury. And so we see this whole conglomerate of conditions and treatments for those conditions that are starting to be utilized, but which are not being utilized by anywhere close to enough patients. All right. So that's what I'm going to talk about. It's a little gloomy and doomy, but I think we'll get through it okay. And so I'm going to talk about that this afternoon. And I'm going to do it in terms of the newsletter that Catherine put together. And I'm just going to kind of follow through that and add a lot of information as I go through it. But she created a very nice backbone to this entire topic. So I'm going to start there. So in a moment, I'm going to shift you over to sharing my screen, and we're going to go through that presentation. And what I would really appreciate is, as I go through this, is if you would listen to it and see if there's anything that you would like clarification about, right? Treatment principles. Why this? Why that? Why not this? Why not that? Et cetera. Things that may occur to you. Now, again, there's a massive amount of research to support everything I'm going to talk about today. Typically, when I do seminars, webinars, et cetera, although some of them are based purely on Chinese medicine and the theories of same, which were not created originally during a time when the scientific method was well known. Now, the Chinese used the scientific method. It's a method. It's not something magical. It's just a way of looking at reality, studying reality, and coming to conclusions. And the Chinese were doing that 2,000 years ago. The Persians were doing it over 1,000 years ago very effectively. And they actually started calling it in terms that were much like the scientific method. In fact, unfortunately, these days, when someone says, follow the science, I will dive under a rock somewhere or dive under a table, because I find generally when people use that expression, they're actually doing the opposite. And we see this in so many areas. There are bills in Congress, there are laws put forward, and they'll have very lofty, beautiful names. But when you really look at it, often they're doing exactly, I don't mean a little, I mean exactly the opposite of what they're said to be doing. Right? The Patriot Act was one of the biggies. We lost more of our civil rights and freedoms in one signature on the Patriot Act than we'd lost in 200 years of American history before that. And of course, we've continued to lose our civil rights. But it was called the Patriot Act. I mean, who would not want to support the Patriot Act? Particularly in 2001. It's not as popular now, of course. But at that time, to be a patriot was a really, really good thing. And of course, you'd want to support the Patriot Act, even though it was the most unpatriotic act that could have been signed. And so we see these things over and over and over again. And so today, I want to talk about some of the things that are not being spoken of enough, in my opinion. You know, it's like the great Joni Mitchell said, You don't know what you've got till it's gone. They take paradise and they put up a parking lot. And so it's like that. One of the problems that we see in post-COVID and many post-illness issues. I mean, when you look at the long-term mortality figures for post-COVID, for post-influenza, for post-RSV infections, et cetera, the mortality tables are not good. People think they're over these illnesses, these viral problems, et cetera, but they still are prone to die in much higher numbers. Now, this usually isn't necessary. It's because they have not taken the steps to fully recover from these illnesses that they are still so vulnerable to these particularly viral illnesses, although bacterial and fungal are also issues. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go through Catherine's fabulous newsletter. Okay, here we go. Hey, and by the way, again, a reminder that the Sweet Spot is out and published. And thank you. We're getting more and more great reviews, and we really appreciate it. So I'd love for you to purchase the book. It's very inexpensive. I would love to give it to everybody, but then you couldn't be a verified purchaser, right? Which is what we would like for the reviews. So anyway, thank you. I want to thank everybody that's already reviewed it, and thank all of you who are about to review it. And so today, we titled this slightly differently, but the title started out as COVID-19 and the aging brain. And the reason we didn't use that is because in looking at titles, you need to find something that people can identify with. And most people, even if they've had COVID, do not identify the fact that their brain has aged from the COVID. And again, it's the main problem is, as we get older, we will start having some memory and cognition deficits. You can't remember names as well. You can't remember dates as well, perhaps, although generally most people remember the important things to them quite well. But it's the peripheral things, right? Phone numbers, et cetera, that you don't remember as well. And so if they've had COVID and seemingly recovered from that, and their brain functions are going downhill, their cognition's going downhill, their memory's suffering, they tend to associate that with normal aging. Trust me, it ain't normal aging. We treat so many patients for brain issues, for cognition issues post-COVID. It's every single day we're doing that. Figure that if you don't know that you have a problem post-COVID, then you probably do. If you're 100% sure that you are absolutely as sharp and as quick as you were before COVID, that's fine. If you're not sure, it's a problem. You should get checked out. Catherine quotes a British study that found that the original, and again, the research sightings are all at the end of the article. We're not pulling these out of thin air. These are all published, peer-reviewed articles. Well, almost all peer-reviewed. Some of them are pre-publication, but almost all are peer-reviewed articles. This British study found that the original virus can impair cognitive ability in a way equivalent to making the brain age by 2 decades. I want you to hear that. So if you're 60 and you have had COVID, and the more severe the case, the worse it is, then your brain, if it's tested, will probably have a biological age of 80 years old. That is a massive, massive difference. And it's something that you need to do something about, and you potentially and usually can do something about. And the study was published in the journal eClinical Medicine. And so these are a group of experts from Cambridge and Imperial College of London, and they looked at cognitive effects of COVID-19 infection in humans. And what they did is they took a large group of patients who were hospitalized for severe illness between March and July 2020. After the patients recovered from acute infection, the researchers conducted follow-up visits for an average of 6 months to analyze and evaluate their anxiety, to evaluate their depression, to evaluate the level of post-traumatic stress, and they looked at quite a few other variables. But those are some of the ones that really stood out, and it's easy for us to get a handle on. And what they discovered, much to their surprise, by the way, even though they were looking for it, it was still a surprise. they found a significant decline, and the word significant is significant, decline in the patient's attention, right? Their ability to focus, to listen, to read a book, etc. There was a decline in complex problem-solving skills. Now, the problem there is that often as we age, we engage in fewer and fewer problems that require complex problem-solving skills. So maybe you used to do the chess column in the newspaper, and at some point you just stopped doing it. You don't know why. Often that's because of deterioration in problem-solving skills. It gets harder and harder. And then you were reading the bridge column and you stopped doing that because it was just kind of a pain. And you find yourself backing away from complex problem-solving skills. Maybe it was in people that can do math in their head. You can solve really long lines of equations and addition and subtraction, and now you pull out the calculator because it's just a lot easier. Memory decline and reduced accuracy and prolonged reaction time, right? So it takes you longer to respond if your car's in imminent danger. If you drop something, it may hit the floor before you really, really start moving for it. So these are all deficits that were clarified and proven to be an issue with post-COVID syndrome. Now, those deficits, when they were put into perspective, were similar to the cognitive decline a person would experience between the ages of 50 and 70. All right. So a 50-year-old would actually have the level of memory, complex problem solving skills, and attention that a 70-year-old did. That's a little scary. That's equivalent to aging by 2 decades and losing 10 IQ points. Now, the difference in losing 10 IQ points is often the difference between success and failure. Many, many studies have shown that the primary measurement in determining success in life is IQ. It isn't race, it isn't gender, it isn't wealth, it isn't any of those things. Now, those all play a role, of course, right? The more opportunities you get, the better. But the primary mover, by far, and this is proven in numerous studies, was IQ. So if your IQ goes down by 10 points, that is a significant, very significant loss. Where you used to easily win chess games, you now lose chess games. It's that big a difference. Now, what causes COVID-19 to increase the aging process? And here's one concept. It's not the only one, but it's one concept to look at. So we have this, I was going to say theory, but it's actually, it's very well proven, of genes and epigenetics. And so those are like seeds in soil. The genes are like the seeds. Epigenetics is like soil. And these are Catherine's definitions, and look at this. To me, the genes are like the blueprint, right? It's what determines, in large measure, how your body is going to replicate and repair itself, how it's going to create different neurotransmitters, hormones, growth hormones, sex hormones, etc. It's the blueprint. It's saying, here, do this. Epigenetics are changes that can be created in that blueprint, right? Where you can overwrite certain programs, right? And genes don't often change after birth. Usually you have a genetic makeup, all the nucleotide strips on your, or SNPs on your chromosomes, and they're usually not changed. And they like seeds that lie dormant in the soil. Some will grow, some won't. And what determines whether they'll grow are the genetic switches, right? Genes can get switched on or off. We see this with vitamin D as one of the biggest examples. Vitamin D switches on or off over 2,000 genes. Okay, the genes for multiple sclerosis, for example, a variety of genes that control hormone levels, a variety of genes that control how your body responds to stress, etc. And it turns these switches on or off. If you have enough vitamin D, then it will usually go to the beneficial switch position. And if you don't, it won't. Epigenetics then is the study of factors that affect genes being turned on or off. Whoa, check it out. And so we know that there is genetic memory. I have patients that are quite obese that don't overeat at all. I know what they eat. I know they really have very limited food intake. They exercise like crazy, right? It doesn't seem like these people should be obese at all. However, they can't shut off the gene for saving fat. And now we know what these genes are, so it's not a big mystery anymore, except, if you're a frontline doctor and are not looking for those changes. And so, and you'll see that in families where they have survived famine, Holocaust, South Sea Islanders who made very long sailing trips that lasted for months and they had to live on their fat reserves, you'll see that those people have switched off certain genes, often involving uric acid and an enzyme called uricase, so that they no longer produce enough uricase. They produce excess uric acid, which literally prevents the body from burning fat. So no matter what they do, they're going to be obese unless you can trick the genetics and change the epigenetics in the direction that you want to for healthy living. And so there's one common gene switch that controls DNA methylation. Okay, DNA is the double-stranded helix of markers that control how your body, the blueprint for your body. It's what determines how your body will replicate itself accurately. So this is really important. And this change can change the expression of genes, shutting some down, making them non-functional, turning some on, and making them problematic. In one article published in Nature Reviews Genetics, Steve Horvath, who's a professor of human genetics and statistician, at the University of California in Los Angeles, concluded that as people age and have more senescent cells, there are characteristic changes in the methylation status of human DNA. What the heck does that mean? Well, as people age, that's kind of obvious. Characteristic changes in some status of human DNA. So cellular senescence refers to a state of the cell cycle arrest when cells are stressed, as well as the secretion of various inflammatory cytokines at the same time. Now, cytokines, as we're going to talk about in a bit, are inflammatory in most cases. Some are anti-inflammatory, but they are chemicals that are released in response to infection or inflammation, and they instruct the body to send more help, more assistance to particular areas that are inflamed or infected. Now, if you have a pro-inflammatory cytokines released, like interleukin 6, interleukin 8, etc., then the body will really react with pain, with inflammation, and will cause this cellular senescence. And then in a paper published in Nature Aging, which is a Japanese research publication, they stated that senescent cells don't die immediately. Instead, they spread inflammatory cytokines to nearby uninfected cells, causing more cells to senesce as well. Now, that's scary. And interestingly, this is an area that I've studied a lot because I treat a lot of stroke patients, and many patients will suffer from what is called slow stroke. Well, the reason they call it that is a stroke will occur. There's a certain level of damage, and then instead of getting immediately improved conditions, they get worse. They continue to get worse. And what's happening is that as cells die, they're giving off chemicals, inflammatory cytokines generally, that kill the cells next to them. Then those cells, which have been damaged start to die, and they infect the next cells. And we have many ways to stop that process. However, understanding it is the first step. And so with this senescence, it's important to stop the spread of the inflammatory cytokines before they destroy and kill too many cells. Now, everybody in the world has birth, aging, illness, and death, right? We're all born. We all go through an aging process, hopefully. We will all experience illness at some point, and as far as we know, we will all die. Now, and it's now thought by scientists that this is controlled by our internal epigenetic clock, right? Cells are supposed to die. It's called apoptosis. Now, we don't want them to die too quickly, and we don't want them to die too slowly. If they die too slowly, it clogs up the works, right? Causes things like prostate problems and pattern baldness in men as these cells forget to die in those areas, and you start getting this big buildup of cells that don't have enough room for them to grow, and they start cutting off problems with the prostate, with urine flow, or with hair growth in the head. They just really close off the openings because they're so crowded in the cells. Now, this is similar to the idea that everything in our universe has a cycle of formation, stasis, degeneration, and destruction. And so this is very, very similar. It's really identical to the traditional Chinese medical idea of the 5 phases. And there are 5 phases that all organisms go through, all plants go through, all humans go through, actually all organizations go through, from IBM to the local grocery store, right? There's this formation, and then there's growth, and then there's stasis, where it stays stable. Then it starts to degenerate, and then it's destroyed. You look at all of the big, big companies that have come to the degeneration and destruction levels. Okay. I mean, they're all over. All of these big box stores that we grew up with are now going out of business. And there are newer stores with this cycle of formation that are being created. They too will go through that process and eventually degenerate and be destroyed. Now, Professor Horvath summarized this DNA methylation issue, and he associated aging in an epigenetic clock of aging. And biological ages of people. Now, there are many ways to guesstimate or estimate biological age. You can do it by damage to the chromosomes. You can take a blood test and see how frayed the ends of the chromosomes are, the telomeres. And the more frayed and the more damaged they are, the greater the biological age. And what that means is that those frayed, damaged genes, telomeres, will inaccurately duplicate the cells of the body. For example, old guys like me will often grow these big, weird hairs coming out of their ears or out of their nose or in their eyebrows, and that's because the cells are not reproducing accurately. The blueprint has been modified in a way that's not necessarily healthy. And so those genetic locations have been carefully selected by scientists. And again, they took out the modifiers of gender, body parts, comorbidities, other factors. And as a result, they've been highly accurate with precision of 95%. So humans have a normal aging methylation curve. If the DNA methylation is above the curve, he or she will age faster than their peers. If it's below the curve, they'll appear younger than he, her, or her peers. And there are many factors that accelerate aging or increase the epigenetic clock of aging. The Chinese had a concept very similar to this called Jing. And Jing was the vital energetic force, I'm going to call it, that we were all given before birth. It was the combination of sperm and egg coming together, increasing this life form. And out of that life form, movement happened, genetic changes happened, epigenetics happened. And over time, that jing became stronger or weaker. Typically, it got stronger, or at least the effects of it got stronger until in the 20s, and then it began to get a little bit weaker. Now, that jing can be overly used, and the danger accelerated by a whole bunch of things. And this study in Belgium, they found very specific things. Disease, so viral infections, HIV, HIV infections, CMV, which is cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr infections, even simple herpes simplex 1 and 2, all increase these problems. Neurodegenerative diseases, and of course, cancers. So we think of the immediate problems of these, but even worse than that is that it is aging us at a very, very rapid rate. Even if one is cured, so to speak, from the cancer, the damage to the system is horrendous, right? The site of the cancer may be fine, but the epigenetics have been altered. Another is metabolic syndrome. So this is overly high body mass index, hyperglycemia or high blood sugars, other inflammatory factors, and hypertension or high blood pressure. And then stress. This can be post-traumatic syndrome, mental stress, emotional stress, violence experienced in childhood, relationship stress. All of those damage the epigenetics. And here in a study published in the journal in Natural Communications, they looked at blood samples from 232 healthy individuals, 194 non-severe COVID patients, and those numbers don't add up. I need to go back and check on those. 232 healthy, 194 non-severe, and 213 severe COVID-19 patients. And they looked specifically at a DNA methylation analysis. And they found that the epigenetic age of COVID-19 patients was, again, keyword, significantly accelerated. When you see the term significantly in a research paper, that's very significant. Research papers tend to be very moderate, and they don't really jump up and down making a point. So when they use the term significant, that's a big deal. In addition, the epigenetic age in COVID-19 patients is related to the stage of the disease. So during the actual illness, there was a faster depletion, a faster change, a faster epigenetic shift during the inflammatory phase, when the body and the virus are really in intense combat, and then it goes down a little bit. It doesn't mean that the memory comes back. It just means it stops being affected as much. So what are the effects of cellular senescence on our health? So this is huge. It plays a role in many age-related diseases, degenerative diseases of the nerves. You get a lot more peripheral vascular problems. You get a lot more neuropathy, where you get tingling and numbness. The eyes get worse. The lungs get worse. The heart gets capacity becomes diminished. And those are all factors of cellular senescence. Now, reverse aging, here we go. Sounds like a dream come true, right? And we've already looked at a lot of mechanisms related to aging, but it is possible to find and slow down and even reverse aging. Obviously, our diet, our work habits, and lifestyle all affect the epigenetic aging clock. In this 2017 study, they looked at whether or not sitting in meditation affects the epigenetic aging clock. And they took 18 individuals who had been meditating for at least 10 years and meditated for at least 30 minutes a day. And they took that and a group of 20 non-meditators. They put them in two groups, under and over 52 years of age, and they measured the DNA methylation in their blood cells for an estimate of the epigenetic aging acceleration. And the results, the epigenetic aging acceleration increased in elderly non-meditators. The acceleration in elderly meditators was more similar to that of younger people and wasn't affected by the epigenetic aging effect. Essentially, these people's brains stopped aging or dramatically slowed down aging. And then through the use of MRIs, there's been a much furthered development and a more thorough understanding of what actually takes place in our brains when we meditate. Now, there have been studies going back decades and decades. When transcendental meditation was kind of the big thing, there were lots of scientific studies that were showing the benefits of transcendental meditation on health, on lack of illness, on immune function, et cetera. But, those things just don't get a lot of press. There's no money in it. And so they didn't really get the amount of press that I think they should have. The frontal lobe, and many of you hear about this frontal lobe when we talk about particularly young men whose frontal lobe is not fully developed until in their 20s. Actually, there's some disagreement about when it's fully developed, but often young men make a lot of poor choices. And that's because of a frontal lobe problem of reasoning, planning, emotions, self-consciousness, and those stop functioning during meditation. Now, that might sound bad, but really what's happening there is your brain gets a rest. The brain is so overworked. The brain shrinks tremendously, up to 50% at night, so that you can get more lymphatic fluid in there, which cleans out all the toxic chemicals, or hopefully most of the toxic chemicals and residues that are formed from overthinking during the day. And so, because in our culture, we're grossly overthinking most of the time, if we can shut that off, just turn it off, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, the benefits are amazing. The parietal lobe, which processes sensory information, hearing things. And I do lots of different, I'm going to call them programs, but lots of different trainings with students to work with the parietal lobe so that we process sensory information differently. We stop being attached to it, we stop being drawn to it, and we just allow the sensory information to be. Now, that's kind of weird, right? Sounds kind of strange, but when you can do that, it's like taking a nap. Your brain gets to relax. And then the thalamus, which is the area that focuses our attention by interpreting sensory information, actually, again, shows a slowing of incoming information. All of those things, when you put them together, they let our brain relax. What a thought. It's why things like bonsai gardening in general, painting, so many of these things that people will do as a form of hobby or relaxation, it's why so many of those keep people's brains younger. It's not just the activity itself, it's the lack of activity, the lack of thinking, the lack of analyzing everything that allows the brain to relax. Now, and one of the things, people will ask me often how acupuncture works. And unfortunately, it's a problem because acupuncture works in so many different ways, which have all been proven. I mean, the number of ways and methods by which acupuncture is effective and works on the body is a very long list. I probably did today 5 or 6 different types of treatments to affect different processes in the body. And several of them were directed at creating a meditative state in the body. Some were to eliminate pain, and we're working on the nerve arcs there, et cetera. But many times we're working to shut the brain off, literally to slow down the adrenal stimulation that people are living with. And sometimes that's a little hard for people. We actually have to be very careful because sometimes if we really relax them, it kind of freaks people out because they're not used to being relaxed. I know that sounds weird, but it's actually very common. And so acupuncture teaches people how to meditate. I know that sounds a little weird, but every time someone does acupuncture and they go into this state, this internal state of bliss and peace, it is reminding the body, it is training the body how to get there on its own. So every time you do acupuncture, you're not just getting the benefit of acupuncture at that moment, you're retraining the body, the mind, the emotions to be in a healthier state in general as a base state. And when our mind and our body are relaxed, it's much more difficult, not a little, it's much more difficult for diseases to arise. That's why acupuncture and meditation are very powerful forms of preventative-based medicine. And there was a study from UCLA and the Australian National University who jointly published a study in the journal Neural Image. The study's subjects were 250 meditators and 50 non-meditators. The average age was the same in both of them at 51.4 years. The researchers analyzed and compared the brain ages of the two groups and found that the brain age of the meditators was younger than their actual age. Now I'm going to skip over a little bit of this because I want to get back to the problem with COVID and with post-COVID and post-influenza, et cetera. Those conditions create, those illnesses create conditions that damage the body in ways that we don't really think about much. The adrenal glands, which are controlling your energy levels throughout the day, your resiliency. So you go out and work out heavily today, or you do some hiking. Can you come back tomorrow? That's resiliency. And resiliency post-viral infection is down a lot. It's really, really diminished. So that's largely a function of damage to the adrenal glands. In fact, when there have been autopsies, and this was particularly done with the major influenza epidemics, they found that the adrenal glands were just incredibly damaged, weren't capable of really producing the level of hormones that were needed to properly run the body and keep your energy level up. Another problem are micro blood clots. We find tons of those. They're now starting to be a thing, right? Several countries started, if a patient came in with COVID, particularly if they were admitted to the hospital, but even if they weren't, most of them were given triple oral anticoagulation therapies, right? They may be given aspirin and a blood thinner and a second blood thinner or some other anticoagulant. And those patients, by the way, died in lower numbers. The mortality was much less. The hospital readmission was much less. And the future illness was much less. And so that's pointing to these microclots. Now, there's some organizations, some scientific organizations and hospitals that have created some very, very good methods to identify microclots. These are tiny blood clots that you cannot discern in an ultrasound. Ultrasound will show blood clots that are larger, like deep vein thrombosis, but it won't show these microclots. And the microclots are blocking the body's ability to get oxygenated blood to certain parts of the body. And the body then isn't delivering nutrients, and it's also not pulling out waste products. So you're going to have a lot more fatigue. You're going to have much lower resiliency. You have a much higher rate of potential myocarditis, pericarditis, and heart attack and stroke. And so we put a lot of attention on that. Most of my post-COVID patients that show any symptoms are put on natural anticoagulant therapies that are incredibly safe. They're much safer, of course, than the pharmaceuticals. They're not quite as strong, but for the microclots, they're very, very, very effective. And so post-COVID, there are all these things that people don't realize. It's like, oh yeah, I'm a little fatigued, but it's the weather. No, it's post-COVID. It's that your system has been damaged. And if you don't fix it, it ain't going to get better. You've got to do something proactive. Now, you can do it yourself, or you can go to someone that treats these things. Like I said, there are whole clinics all over the United States that treat these conditions. Now, getting into them is another story. It's not easy. So the bottom line, many people, the number one thing that acupuncture treats in the United States is no longer sports injuries. The number one thing that acupuncture treats in the United States is anxiety. Depression is right behind it. So that people have found that acupuncture gives the mind and body a reference point. How do you turn off? How do you turn off those stress hormones? How do you turn down the volume in the brain and tune in to your inner self, your body? How do you tune into those feelings and emotions that are very beneficial to you? And it's like muscle memory. The body remembers the motions when it's time to sit and quiet the mind. And the more often people do acupuncture, the more powerful this is. And so acupuncture, being an energy-based medicine, really helps us get into a meditative state during a treatment. And it's one of the reasons why regular treatments are so important. Now, in my practice and Catherine's practice, we don't see patients a lot. We don't see them extremely often. I try to, be gentle on their pocketbooks and on their time. People are very busy. And so we often won't see people a lot. We'll work mostly significantly with herbs, with supplements, with energy practices that people can do at home, etc. However, when it comes to anxiety and depression, there is nothing like acupuncture itself. And fortunately, I'm blessed. Right now, I have the best staff I have ever had in my life. And I'm delighted. We just got an email from a patient that drove down from Nevada County who's been diagnosed with cancer and has been fighting that and got to the point where she couldn't eat and she was having trouble sleeping, et cetera. And I wasn't available. So she saw one of our other acupuncturists and just wrote a beautiful email extolling the virtues of this acupuncturist and how great she felt after the treatment. And the nice thing for me is that we now have someone in the clinic 7 days a week so that we can treat people for anxiety, depression, brain problems. So I'm feeling really good about that. So my recommendations, start doing some meditation. It can be sitting meditation. It can be moving meditation. It could be Tai Chi. It could be yoga. It could be Qigong, but it must be meditative. Now with Tai Chi and yoga, at the beginning, they're not so perfectly meditative because you're thinking about what you're going to do. You're going to do a posture. You're going to, do something. You're going to do a Tai Chi move. But over time, as the body learns those by rote, by muscle memory, they become extremely meditative. If that you don't want to spend that much time, then start doing a sitting practice. There are pretty much an infinite number of people that are teaching meditation techniques that you can do online or through Zoom, et cetera, or find someone live, which is ideal. And so I would say it's really important to start your meditative practice. It doesn't take time. It's been proven that people that do a meditation practice actually get more done. So maybe you spend 20 minutes in meditation, but you get another hour of active, powerful work done. So at any rate, I recommend that you do your meditation, get acupuncture if you need it, which most of us do. And I want to thank you for tuning in. I will be back again next Thursday at 3:30. Be happy, be healthy, and I'll catch you on the flip side.